The most malicious thing Lin Mi has ever done in her life was to abandon her childhood sweetheart and rub her self-esteem under her feet when she was in poverty. 6 years later, her ex-boyfriend became the top boss and used practical actions to tell her what it meant to not deceive a poor young man. She was forced to enter this adult game controlled by him, walking the kidney but not the heart. The two of them were unspoken, heartless and devoid of love, resisting the lingering death. Until one day, Lin Mi saw him holding a little girl in his arms and softly coaxing her. The little girl is delicate and innocent, very lovable. She decided to unilaterally terminate the agreement. As a result, he was stuck in the bed of the bedroom that night. The man was dignified and cold, with a smile on his lips. "There is no divorce between us, only widowhood," he said. He pushed her to the corner of the bed, his usually indifferent eyes seeming uncontrollable. "Lin Mi, dare you play a big game? Do you dare to pretend?" Chapter 1. Don't bully the poor youth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On Lin Mi's 27th birthday, she was packed and sent away by an unscrupulous boss. Huayu International, a booming emerging enterprise in the past 2 years, has strong strength and cannot be underestimated. It is said that the boss comes from the Qin family in Beijing and has a prominent and complex network. Xie Yunjing gave her to someone just to get on this big boat. Lin Mi stared at the locked door and cursed loudly, "My surname is Xie. I am your 8th-generation ancestor. I have been working with you for 6 years, working hard and achieving great results. Why did I apologize to you? You want to pit me like this?" Xie Yunjing ran away early. Lin Mi was furious and kicked hard. The door didn't kick open and she twisted her ankle. She was sweating in pain and sat by the bed, taking out her phone to call the police. However, the phone screen went black and I couldn't open it anymore. Damn it. This bastard surname Xie didn't leave any way for her to survive. Lin Mi angrily smashed her phone out. With a loud bang, it hit the man who had just pushed the door in. He was tall and dressed in a black iron suit, with deep eyebrows and eyes, thin lips cold and sharp, looking at her expressionlessly. Lin Mi felt that this person looked a bit familiar, but she didn't remember for a moment. But the other party's identity is obvious. Lin Mi thinks she should fight for it. After all, for this kind of person, her abilities are far more valuable than her body. So she straightened her clothes, pushed her glasses up, sat upright, and showed the demeanor of a chief secretary. "Mr. Qin, I don't know what deal Mr. Xie has reached with you, but this matter is illegal without my consent. These days, I have some way to defend my legitimate rights unless you kill me. But the president of the Tang Tang Huayu group should not be confused enough to provoke a lawsuit for those few sperm in his pants, right?" After threatening, she slowed down her tone and said, "I know that Huayu has just arrived at Yunqing for development this year, and the troubles in the initial stage are the most. My name is Lin Mi, and you may not have heard of it. I have been working in Yunqing for 6 years, and my reputation has always been good. I have also accumulated some of my own network resources. If Huayu needs it, I am willing to offer it all." She is very confident in her resume, and anyone who has a bit of a brain should understand which is more important than which. Unexpectedly, the man looked at her and sneered, "Lin Mi." Lin Mi's heart skipped a beat, feeling a bit ominous. The man strode up to her, pinched her chin, forced her to look up, and then pulled off her glasses. "Open your dog's eyes and take a good look. Who is I?" Those black eyes were deep and lifeless, filled with rolling anger. With a loud bang in Lin Mi's head, some things that were so far away and almost forgotten slowly emerged. During her 6 years in Yunqing, she has worked exceptionally well and acted swiftly, but her private life seems like a stagnant pool, with no interest in men or women. People in the industry call her Little Master. But actually, she has had a boyfriend before. "My ex-boyfriend's name is Chen Yan. He is a tall and handsome sunny boy who loves her very much. At that time, I had not yet come to Yunqing and lived in a small town. They attend classes together, do homework together, and buy groceries and cook together. Chen Yan is very intelligent, always ranking first in her grade in exams. She has to work hard to catch up with him. On the eve of the college entrance examination, the two agreed to take the university entrance examination in Beijing together. They are all orphans, carefree, and only want to venture into the big city. But as soon as the college entrance examination was over, she dumped her. The reason is that we have had enough poor days and cannot see the future with him. Chen Yan cried and begged her. The handsome 7-foot man couldn't bring out the chips to keep her, and even knelt down for her. But she trampled on his self-esteem and left without looking back. The man's cold voice rang in his ear, "Speak." Lin Mi regained consciousness in a daze, as the man in front of him was dressed in luxury and wished he could eat his own flesh and blood. "Oh no, don't deceive the young man into being poor. I don't know if it's in time to salvage it now. Chen Yan, we have also had a period of..." Before he could finish speaking, the man grabbed his collar and threw him onto the bed. "Shut up, you don't have the right to call me that name." Lin Mi wants to hide, but Chen Yan has already bullied her. With the momentum of storm, black eyes stare at her closely. He asked, "Lin Mi, have you ever regretted these 6 years?" Lin Mi hesitated for a moment and shook her head. Chen Yan sneered and placed his hand around her neck, slowly tightening it. "Really? I regret it countless times. I should have strangled you to death." Oxygen was deprived, and Lin Mi's heart panicked, but the man suddenly let go of her. She took a deep breath, panting heavily, but Chen Yan let out a fierce expression, pulling her wrist and pressing it up. Lin Mi wanted to refuse, but her physical strength was unbeatable, which made the man's anger even more fierce. At the most intense moment, she saw Chen Yan's eyes calm and devoid of emotion. It seems that he is not doing the most intimate thing between men and women, but rather taming animals. After everything was over, Lin Mi got up and put on clothes. Chen Yan leaned against the head of the bed, glanced aside, and asked, "Have you ever slept with someone surnamed Xie?" Lin Mi followed his gaze and saw a bright red in the pure white sheets. She smiled and said, "How could it be? It's Auntie who's here." Chen Yan didn't speak and got up and left. After the door closed, Lin Mi's smiling face instantly collapsed. She supported the bed and sat down, her thighs burning with pain. Glancing at the bloody cover in the trash can, I couldn't help but bite my back teeth. This bastard was too ruthless and almost killed her half. I thought it would end like this, but it's just a bit of an old grudge. He's already a big shot, so let's not hold on to it. The next day, Lin Mi fiercely attacked the Xie family and planned to settle accounts with Xie Yunzheng. "Mr. Lin, Mr. Xie is on a business trip," said the director of the general manager's office, carefully accompanying his smiling face. Lin Mi asked, "When will you be back?" "The return date is uncertain." "This grandson." Lin Mi vomited blood in anger, and she was also a close friend of Xie Yunzheng. When Xie was handed over to Xie Yunzheng, she was burdened with billions of debts to survive. She put in a lot of hard work to get to where she is today, and someone surnamed Xie played this game with her. The director of the general manager's office wiped the cold sweat off his forehead, thinking about the instructions before Mr. Xie left, only feeling his legs and stomach trembling. "Chief Lin, there's one more thing." Lin Mi said coldly, "Say." A resignation document was handed over to her. "Mr. Xie." Mr. Xie said that starting tomorrow, you don't need to come to the company. Lin Mi held the document and didn't speak. When she was silent, the entire general manager's office, consisting of over 20 people, remained silent like a cicada. This is the prestige established by Lin Mi with years of swift and resolute actions and iron fists. A few seconds later, she sneered and turned her head and left. The severance pay includes 12 months of salary and an additional compensation fee, totaling 2.4 million yuan. Standing at Xie's doorstep, a phone with an unfamiliar number came in. "Hello, who is that?" The voice on the phone was cold but familiar. Come to Rongzhuang in an hour and accompany me to a dinner party. Mr. Qin, I'm not your employee, Lin Mi said as she held her phone and her fingers furrowed slightly. Qin Yan smiled lightly and said, unless you want your mother to stop taking medicine. Lin Mi's pupils trembled violently. Are you investigating me? Her mother was found after leaving the small town, and due to a rare illness, she has been recuperating in a mountain sanatorium without even knowing the people around her. Qin Yan's voice was faint. So what? Lin Mi angrily hung up the phone. Taking a few deep breaths, she called the nursing home to inquire about her mother's situation. The dean was anxious and said, Miss Lin, there's a problem with the source of the special medicine. We can't get the medicine here anymore. Ms. Li's medicine can only last for at most 3 more days. The hospital is currently trying to find a solution. Lin Mi looked at the black jade Buddha on the side, and after a while, he punched the steering wheel heavily. Chapter 2. She wasn't scared either. You are listening at novel-full.audio. An hour later, she parked her car at the entrance of Rongzhuang. Qin Yan stood on the steps, his gaze mocking. You are indeed as familiar with current affairs as ever. Lin Mi looked at him and said, Don't touch my mother. Qin Yan tugged at the corner of his mouth and said, It depends on your sincerity. I have already arrived. Miss Lin doesn't think this is enough, does she? Qin Yan sneered and looked at her coldly. I'm currently lacking a personal secretary. If you can handle it, you can just write off the past. If you can't, then forget it. Everyone is an adult, and to what extent they are private, they know each other well. Qin Yan didn't give her time to weigh the pros and cons, so she turned around and went in. This banquet is a welcome party hosted by the Zhou family for Princess Zhou Wanju's return to China. The Zhou family is an old aristocrat from Yuncheng, and their guests are all top-level elites. Lin Mi quickly understood why Qin Yan had called her. The Qin family in Beijing, no matter how prosperous, is also in Beijing. This is Yuncheng. Qin Yan needs a pedal to pave the way for Huayu Group. Or, to put it another way, he needs someone with status and reputation to endorse him. Lin Mi may not be his most suitable choice, but it is the most cost-effective one. One night, Lin Mi accompanied him through a banquet with a wine glass in hand. A kind-hearted person asked, Isn't Chief Lin loyal to General Xie? Why are we looking for a new branch? Lin Mi smiled confidently and said, When people walk higher, water flows lower. Huayu has greater potential, and Mr. Qin is also a good person. We get along very happily. The scene was filled with human spirits, and you could hear how much hidden information was released in these words. The other party's teasing smile. After the person left, Qin Yan shook the wine in his hand and asked, I heard you've been with Xie Yunjing for 6 years. Lin Mi nodded and said, yes. He couldn't distinguish between joy and anger in his eyes. To sum up, I threw myself into his arms as soon as I was dumped. It seems that what he can give you satisfies you very much. You haven't changed people in all these years. It's not bad, Lin Mi replied, Mr. Xie has a deep affection for me. Qin Yan sneered, you still give him eye drops because of your deep affection and righteousness. I don't know how frustrated Xie is when he discovers your true face. Lin Mi paused and smiled as if nothing had happened. He sold me first, I'm calling it tooth for tooth. Besides, I despise poverty and love wealth, and hypocritically worship money. Did Mr. Qin find out? Qin Yan's face suddenly turned black, you have self-awareness. Lin Mi raised his wine glass at him and said, it's always been like this. Qin Yan snorted. Without even waiting for the banquet to end, rumors of Xie's long-standing cheating and Xie Yunjing's stingy behavior were flying around. In the middle, there is also gossip about Lin Mi kicking Xie Yunjing to climb the new high. This group of investors is most familiar with the helm, and it can be foreseen that Xie's stocks will be very lively in the coming days. Lin Mi was very satisfied. Her grandson surnamed Xie tricked her, and she retaliated and evened it out. In the second half of the banquet, Qin Yan was already at ease. She finally had time to rest and chose an empty balcony to lean against the railing and watch the night view. Suddenly, a figure appeared beside me. Zhou Shaoan rested his hand on the railing, took a sip of wine, and asked, "What's going on with you and Xie Yunzheng?" Lin Mi glanced at him and said, "What's going on? Don't play dumb with me. You said it yourself, I love him so much that I can't let go." Zhou Shaoan looked at her and said, "You promised me that if one day you don't love him anymore, I will be the first in line." "Big brother, don't harm me anymore," Lin Mi said, "one head and too big. What does the Zhou family exist?" The leading veteran tycoon in Kuanyun City, who values rules and status. If you really dare to stir up trouble with Zhou Shaoan, the Zhou family can crush her into ashes in just a few minutes. Only Zhou Gongzi was naive, thinking that selling a few paintings would break free from family control, but little did he know that all those paintings were bought by his elder brother. Zhou Shaoan chuckled twice, "So you really fooled me back then." Lin Mi said helplessly, "I have no other choice. She is just a nobody," the second young master of the Zhou family's aggressive pursuit, even refusing too directly. "I dare to admit it now because it has been 3 years since the incident. In the circle of the second generation of wealthy people, there is mostly a desire based on appearance, and there is no such thing as infatuation or affection." Zhou Shaoan held his heart in his mouth and said, "It's too hurtful. Why don't you criticize my careless nature and lack of ambition?" Lin Mi nodded seriously and said, "I will consider it next time." "Poochie," Zhou Shaoan sneered and touched her glass. "All right, I know you have a high vision and don't insist. My gallery will open the day after tomorrow. Come and give me a thumbs up." He handed over an invitation card. Lin Mi continued, "Okay, I will go." Before the words could finish, a deep magnetic voice rang out from behind, "I've heard that Tuesday's Xiaohuan has extremely high artistic attainments and has always wanted to see, but I don't know if Tuesday's Xiaohuan is welcome or not." At the moment when Zhou Shaoan leaned over and met Qin Yan's 4 eyes, something that only men could understand was clear in their hearts. He smiled and generously took out the invitation. "It's my honor for Mr. Qin to be willing to honor me." Qin Yan politely thanked him. However, after Zhou Shaoan left, he changed hands and threw the invitation card into the trash can. Lin Mi frowned and said, "Since you're not interested, why trample on others' intentions? Do you know how much effort he put into opening this gallery? The invitation in his hand is limited, so don't take it if you don't want to go." Qin Yan sneered and looked at her mockingly, "Defend him for injustice. Then go tell him." Lin Mi became angry and said, "Why are you so unreasonable now?" Before she could finish speaking, she was pinned to the railing by the man, and Qin Yan looked down at her with a aloof demeanor. "Lin Mi, did I give you a face?" Lin Mi was forced to look awkwardly sideways by his gaze, and then he spoke coldly, "If you have the ability, take Zhou Shaoan and confront me, or else you'll straighten out your identity." Lin Mi remained silent for a moment and pursed her lips. "I understand." After the banquet, Lin Mi immediately called the sanatorium, and the dean smiled and said, "I just received a call from the medicine source. It was a false alarm. The medicine supply has been restored. Miss Lin, rest assured." Lin Mi finally breathed a sigh of relief and said, "You've taken the trouble." She certainly knew that this was not a false alarm, it was Qin Yan's downward pressure on her. But she wasn't scared too much either. Lin Mi first called the former pharmaceutical company owner to inquire about relevant information. After listening to her words, the other party said, "Secretary Lin, it's not that I'm not helping. It's really that you're talking about this medicine. Currently, only Gree is doing it in China, and there is great competition. Other pharmaceutical companies are not allowed to develop it for 20 years. Greg, it's the one that currently supplies sanatoriums." Lin Mi asked, "What about abroad?" "This medicine is the first in China, the other party asked. Has Secretary Lin encountered difficulties in domestic channels? In fact, if you can buy it from abroad, the price will increase more than 20 times. Lin Mi smiled and said, "Okay, I got it. Thank you. If there's any need, I'll trouble you again." After hanging up the phone, she remained silent for a while, then opened her contacts and dialed a number. Chapter 3. You never mentioned before that you have a girlfriend. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Mr. Shang, I remember you work in a sanatorium and would like to ask, what are the facilities and medical conditions in high-end sanatoriums that can compete with Haipeng's? Mr. Shang smiled and said, Haipeng is almost at the top of the industry. Perhaps only Ting Xiao from Beijing can compete with him. Secretary Lin, is something wrong? Do you need any help? I have some connections with Ting Xiao. Mr. Shang once owed her a favor, so Lin Mi responded with a nod, okay, if there's any need, I'll call you again. The next day, Lin Mi drove to Haipeng Sanatorium. The sanatorium is located in the mountains, far away, and took over 2 hours to arrive. The dean accompanied her to visit, only to see her mother sitting in a wheelchair, staring blankly at the petals on the ground. The nurse is replacing her urine bag. The dean said, her condition has been quite stable recently. She hasn't been making a fuss about finding someone or falling. The medicine has really worked well this time. If you keep using it, maybe her condition won't worsen. Lin Mi's gaze remained silent, without speaking. My mother's situation is very special. She suffers from a disease that is currently incurable in medicine. When she found her mother back then, she was already mentally unstable and her body became fragile in a very short time. Even if she accidentally falls or breaks her skin, it can be fatal. Moreover, the mother also has an unknown knot in her heart. Whenever she sees a man, she will struggle and insult him crazily. She usually needs at least 3 female medical staff to accompany her closely. In recent years, the expenditure on drugs alone has reached 80,000 yuan per month, and with the addition of sanatoriums and nursing care, this number is 120,000 yuan. She has never complained about anything, only grateful that she has enough ability to cover this expense. After standing there watching for a long time, Lin Mi finally spoke up, is there any risk if we transfer to another hospital? The dean said, the risk is very high. Like our sanatorium, many emergency equipment are top-notch in the world. As far as I know, there is currently no hospital in China that can provide treatment conditions of the same standard as our sanatorium, let alone the risks during the transfer process and the risks of adapting to the environment after the transfer. On the way back, Lin Mi felt heavy-hearted. My mother's current situation is simply not suitable for transfer. If we don't transfer, we can't get rid of Qin Yan's control. If forcibly transferred, the risk is one thing, and she cannot afford the exorbitant medical expenses of 1.6 million yuan per month. Lin Mi sighed irritably. At that moment, her phone rang and she answered casually. Qin Yan's careless voice came from the phone. How's it going? After asking around, have you given up? Lin Mi clenched the steering wheel tightly. Obviously, her every move was within his control. After a while, she said, being a secretary is okay, but I'm not a lover. Qin Yan laughed arrogantly and said, Miss Lin, don't you think I'm offering this condition because I appreciate your talent? You have so much backbone, why don't you just forget it? As for whether it's really okay or not, it's self-evident. If she really doesn't agree this time, waiting for her and her mother is no less than a catastrophic disaster. Hanging up the phone, Lin Mi gently rubbed the black jade Buddha beside her, making a choice in her heart. She couldn't believe Qin Yan, even though he was holding on to him, she didn't lose any of the necessary precautions. She used her connections and hired a reliable female medical worker who was proficient in close combat to personally protect her mother in a nursing home. Afterwards, he agreed to Qin Yan's conditions and moved into the high-end residential area where he lived, on different floors of the same building. She indulged in hardship and comforted herself. At least her living standards have improved significantly. Over the years, due to the huge expenses on her mother's side, she has never been willing to live in such a good house. I don't know how long Qin Yan will be fresh due to the unremarkable relationship. The next day, Lin Mi went to Huayu to report and was assigned to the secretary's office of the CEO. There were originally 3 people in the secretariat, and the work relationship had already been balanced. She suddenly parachuted in and naturally could not be easily accepted. She sat idle in the corner of the office all morning. As noon approached, a sweet smiling girl walked in and asked, "Is I in there?" Su Chu stood up personally and smiled warmly, "Yes, of course I am. Mr. Qin won't wait for Miss Su to have lunch with you one day." Su's position is similar to Lin Mi's previous position in the Xie family, indicating how much this girl is valued. The girl happily thanked and pushed the door open before entering. Lin Mi still remembers that when she first arrived in the morning, Su Chu pointed to the door and sternly warned, "Mr. Qin doesn't like people who have no sense of propriety. If you have anything to report, you must knock on the door. Wait until Mr. Qin agrees before entering, otherwise you will be dismissed. Don't blame me for not reminding you. It doesn't seem like I don't like people who have no sense of propriety. It's not someone he likes except for Miss Su." Lin Mi sat in her seat, listening to their gossip. The girl's name was Su Baiwan, the daughter of the Su family, a wealthy family in Beijing. She had a childhood sweetheart with Qin Yan and is said to be getting engaged soon. She also works in the company, in the planning department downstairs, as the deputy minister. Back then, Qin Yan went to Yunqing to pursue his career just for her, otherwise there wouldn't be the current Huayu. In recent years, Su Baiwan has given up everything about Miss Jing and rooted herself in Yunqing to help Qin Yan. She has both merits and hardships, and Qin Yan also spoils her. Even if she is busy, she will bring her breakfast and wait for her to have lunch together. The love between the two is well known in the company, and all girls dream of meeting a good man like Qin Yan. Su Baiwan left after finishing lunch. During lunch break, colleagues in the office gathered together to go out for a meal. Lin Mi ordered takeout, but before she could get it, the internal phone on the table rang. She answered, "Hello, the Secretariat of the President's office." A sneer came from inside, "You're quite diligent. Come in." After speaking, "I just hung up." Lin Mi glanced at the tightly closed dark gray door over there, then stood up and knocked on it. A deep voice came from inside, "Come in." Lin Mi pushed the door open and closed it with her back hand. Qin Yan was sitting diagonally on the leather sofa, legs crossed, drinking a drink. The brand looks familiar, and Lin Mi hasn't tried it for a long time, but at first glance, she can tell that it's her favorite green plum grape. "When we were together before, we were poor and only had money to buy a cup when we received scholarships." "And Qin Yan?" "Oh no, back then he was called Chen Yan, and he never got used to drinking such sweet and greasy things." She was unwilling and stuck the straw into his mouth, but could only force him to take such a small sip. "I didn't expect to see him for 6 years, and he also started drinking this thing." Qin Yan put down the empty milk tea cup and hooked the corner of his mouth. "Wan loves to drink, you always want to order me a cup. The tone is so indulgent." Lin Mi frowned and asked, "Is there anything I need?" Qin Yan sat in a different position, seemingly casually asking, "Are you still used to living in a new house?" Lin Mi paused for a moment and said, "It's pretty good." Qin Yan nodded and said lightly, "I'll go over tonight, you prepare for it." Lin Mi's eyes flickered slightly and she didn't speak. Qin Yan raised his eyes and said, "Why, have you changed your mind?" After a moment of silence, Lin Mi looked at her and said, "You never mentioned before that you have a girlfriend." "Oh, do I need to report my situation to you?" Qin Yen lazily poured a glass of water without even looking at her. Did you really go in and seduce Mr. Qin during the lunch break in Chapter 4? You are listening at novel-full.audio. I don't need anything else, Lin Mi pursed her lips, but you've turned me into your lover, don't you need to tell me in advance? Qin Yen stopped moving and smiled lightly, hey, do you still have this kind of moral outlook? For a moment, Lin Mi really wanted to go to his mother. He boiled a kettle and poured water on his face. How crazy he was. But the reality is that the chips are being held by others, and she has to bow down. I have weak moral values, but I am not a beast, she said calmly. If you have a girlfriend, we can no longer maintain this relationship. I can accept being a lover, but I cannot be a mistress and harm another innocent girl. Qin Yen played with the water cup in his hand and sneered. Lin Mi frowned and said, you should also love Miss Su very much. She has given so much for you, and you should be even more kind to her. The most basic requirement for a man to be good to a woman is loyalty. If you really love her, you should take good care of her and not hurt her heart with such things. You're right, Wan has indeed put in a lot of effort for me. She's different from you. She doesn't mind me being poor, doesn't mind me starting from scratch and making it difficult for her to live a good life. She's willing to work hard with me and work hard with me. I love her so much that I can't bear to touch or offend her. Qin Yen smiled faintly at the corner of her mouth, got up and walked over step by step, stroking her face with his big hand. His gaze was deep, as if he was looking at his beloved lover. But you're different, Lin Mi. I don't have to pity you. What's the point of using you as a toy? Don't you know that a man's love and sex can be separated? Lin Mi felt her blood flow backwards and her whole body was cold. You. She opened her mouth, but remained silent. What am I? Qin Yen smiled and slid his palm down her cheek, lightly picking up her clothes. Speak up, aren't you quite articulate? Lin Mi squeezed out from between her teeth, you bastard. Qin Yen laughed loudly, as if he had heard a big joke. He lowered his head and said coldly in her ear, Lin Mi, in this matter, I'm not as good as you. After speaking, he directly lifted the person onto the table, waved the thing aside, and then pressed it up. Lin Mi struggled desperately. The first time she was in the hotel that day, she didn't cry, but now her eyes turned red and she said, get out. Don't treat me like that kind of woman. Qin Yen bit her ear and asked, what kind of woman do you think you are? Are you having an affair with a man who has a girlfriend? Or is it a woman who is having an affair with her boss in the office during lunch break? His subordinate's movements intensified, but his voice was soft, like a lover's murmur, Lin Mi, weren't you like this before? Lin Mi wished he could stab this bastard to death. She did indeed do so, reaching out to touch a black jade gentai and smashing it onto Qin Yen's head. Qin Yen let out a muffled groan, covered his head, and his hand was covered in sticky blood. His black eyes instantly became angry, and his voice was calm and frightening. Okay, you're showing off. Lin Mi's hands were also trembling, gritting her teeth and saying, get out of here, don't touch me. Qin Yen sneered and pulled out her belt, tying her hands together. The process was very painful. It was only 2 days since the last time they did it, and Lin Mi was trembling with pain without realizing it. Qin Yen looked at her with cold eyes, and for a while, whether her movements had slowed down or not. The last thought in Lin Mi's mind was how much this man loves to play, and there were still condoms in the office. Afterwards, Qin Yen ignored her and took the car key before leaving. Lin Mi gritted her teeth and got up, her legs trembling as she walked into the bathroom to tidy herself up in the mirror. The red and swollen lips and the marks on the neck cannot be covered no matter how hard they are. What would colleagues think when she walked out like this? Forget it, stretching her head was a blow, and shrinking her head was also a blow. Lin Mi looked at death as if returning home, pushed open the door, and walked out. Ignoring the shocked gazes of the three colleagues, she walked straight to her seat. In front of her, no one said anything, but Lin Mi knew with her toes that this matter couldn't be hidden. I just didn't expect retribution to come so quickly. As she was about to finish work, Su Bai-Wanhong walked in with her eyes fixed on her and headed straight in front of her. Are you Mr. Qin's newly recruited secretary Lin? Lin Mi glanced at her colleague who was glancing at her and frowned. Miss Su, let's go outside and talk, okay? Su Bai-Wan shook her head and said, just say, Secretary Lin, you told me in front of everyone that you really went in to seduce Mr. Qin during lunch break. Lin Mi curled up her fingers, feeling clear in her heart. It seems that Su Bai-Wan is not just a small white flower on the surface. Intentionally choosing this time and place was to have a public trial, but without a bloody sword, it would ruin her reputation. But ultimately, it was her fault for this matter. Even if Lin Mi saw through it, she wouldn't do much. She only explained, the relationship between me and Mr. Qin is not what you think. So, you're really with him. Su Bai-Wan's tears streamed down her eyes. Lin Mi frowned even tighter and said, I apologize to you, but this is not what I wanted. In fact, what you should solve now is the man. Making things difficult for me does not allow your life to return to its original state. Su Bai-Wan cried and said, Secretary Lin, how could you be so shameless? You seduced my boyfriend. I just wanted to ask you clearly, you actually criticized me. What did I do wrong? After speaking, he sobbed and ran away. My office colleague immediately looked at Lin Mi with an indescribable expression. Lin Mi pursed her lips lightly and turned to the restroom. When it came out, the rumors had already spread. Who has been able to get close to Mr. Qin for so many years? She has been successful since she arrived, and I don't know how many times she has used such vulgar means. The most pitiful thing is Miss Su, who loves someone with all her heart and lungs, but encounters such a thing. Why are you saying that Lin Mi is so cheap? Not only cheap, but also arrogant. Haven't you heard of it? Miss Su was caught in bed and threatened to rely on her abilities, making Miss Su cry in anger all afternoon. Lin Mi stood at the corner, listening to these words with a calm expression. If this is Su Bai-Wan's goal, then she has nothing to say. She is tall and thin, and in order to show off her imposing demeanor, she always straightens her back. But at this moment, it seemed like the spine was bent under pressure, and the back of the person turning around showed a hint of embarrassment. After work, Lin Mi drove back to the high-end residential area arranged by Qin Yan. As soon as I pushed the door open, I saw Qin Yan sitting on the sofa. The injury on his head was obviously treated, comically wrapped in a bandage. Holding a cigarette in his hand, the ash burned a long strip without bouncing. He sat there as if in a daze or thinking about something, but as soon as Lin Mi opened the door, he immediately regained his senses and glanced coldly with his black eyes. Lin Mi paused in her footsteps, ignored him, hung up her bag and coat on her side, and walked towards the kitchen. In order to save some money, she has always had the habit of cooking her own meals. In the past 2 years, as her work has become busier, cooking has become a pastime that allows her to briefly relax in her damn life. She carefully cooked herself a bowl of seafood noodles, and the fresh aroma of yellow clams soaked her nose. She picked up the bowl and walked out. Qin Yan came over at some point and leaned against the door, looking at her with a faint smile on his lips, a bit disdainful and a bit malicious. This bowl of noodles is truly full of color, aroma, and fragrance. Lin Mi even put her favorite coriander on it. Just looking at it made her feel satisfied, and she couldn't wait to start enjoying it. However, when passing by Qin Yan, he extended his long arm and directly carried the bowl away. Lin Mi's good mood suddenly became irritable. What are you doing? Qin Yan glanced at her sideways with a faint expression and said, I've lost so much blood today. Can't you give me a touch? Lin Mi sneered, you deserve it. Qin Yan shrugged and said, if you have the ability, come and grab it. Chapter 5 That's your business, what does it have to do with me? You are listening at novel-full.audio. He shook the bowl to the table and enjoyed the fruits of her labor without hesitation. Lin Mi took 3 deep breaths in a row, suppressed the fire, and pulled out a chair to sit opposite him. Miss Su already knows about noon. Qin Yen bit off the noodles and let out a Lin Mi looked at him and said, "What were you planning on?" Qin Yen took a sip of soup with the yellow clam and said lightly, "You're good at your craft. Did you learn it from someone surnamed Xie?" Qin Yen. Lin Mi glared at him, gritting her teeth. "As a girl, she has given so much for you. Do you really have a conscience?" Qin Yen put down his chopsticks and swept over with a mocking black eye. "Before you say this, ask yourself," he said. Lin Mi took a deep breath. "I know you hated me for that before, but after all, it's been 6 years, hasn't it? We've all started a new life, why ruin our good days for this grudge?" Qin Yen let out a ha and had a cold smile. His gaze fell silent, and his tone remained calm. "Started a new life. You're quite open-minded." Lin Mi was defeated in his gaze, pursed her lips, and said, "If you still blame me for kneeling down in the past, can't I kneel down for you now? Or what do you say? As long as I can do it, I will definitely make you take this breath." Qin Yan's lips curved into a playful smile, but his eyes were filled with coldness. "Whatever I say, what will you do?" Lin Mi bit her lip and said, "As long as you don't use this method anymore, I don't want to hurt anyone." Qin Yan said, "Then I want you to give me all your property under your name and immediately get out of Cloud City. Are you willing to do so?" Lin Mi breathed a sigh of relief and quickly nodded, "Sure, give me a few days, I'll arrange it right away. As long as he doesn't take his mother's medicine, she'll leave and wait for the storm to pass before finding a way to secretly visit her." However, before Qin Yen could let out his breath, he grabbed her chin. With a sneer, "You agreed so decisively, do you think it's easy to start over in a different place? With a bit of charm and means, you feel like you can win over wealthy people anywhere, just like Xia Yunjing and Zhou Shaoan." Lin Mi thought he was making trouble for nothing. "What the hell is wrong with you? I just have a fucking problem. What can you do with me?" Qin Yen sneered. "The world is real. People without money, power are garbage. Lin Mi, you told me that." He looked at her arrogantly and unruly, "Aren't you moral? I want to see you being immoral, ashamed, and suffering before I feel relieved. What can you do? As for Wan, I will naturally love her well, love her, take care of her, and don't need you to worry." Lin Mi was so angry that she couldn't speak, and coldly watched him get up, change shoes, and put on a coat. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, "I can't face her." Qin Yen stopped moving, turned his head to look at her, raised his eyebrows in surprise, and said, "That's your business. What does it have to do with me?" After he finished speaking, he closed the door and left. Lin Mi grabbed a teapot and threw it fiercely, "Scum. Garbage. Crazy. I was one step late and didn't hit anyone. Instead, I broke a piece of glass on the ground." The next day, as soon as Lin Mi arrived at the company, she saw Su Baiwan come out of Qin Yan's office. She was still dressed in her simple outfit, with a pink hoodie, blue jeans, white sneakers, hair tied in a ponytail, youthful and energetic. "Just my hair is a bit messy, and my cheeks are also red." The two collided face to face and both stopped for a moment. Colleagues in the office all cast their eyes. "Is Secretary Lin really trying to steal Ian?" Su Baiwan said with a suppressed expression and red eyes. Lin Mi frowned and said, "Miss Su, I hope you understand that I have never had such thoughts." Su Baiwan bit her lips and said, "I'm afraid you'll regret it. Ian is a man, and there's always a moment of impulse. We're about to get engaged, and you've been struggling until the end, it's just a pipe of water." Lin Mi always feels powerless when talking to her, as if her lips are not aligned with her mouth. She didn't take Su Baiwan's little trick seriously. But still that sentence, just treat it as if she owes someone. So she didn't speak. Su Baiwan punched the cotton, her eyes suddenly filled with anger, but in an instant, she smiled and left without hesitation. In the afternoon, Lin Mi took a leave and drove to Zhou Xiaowen's gallery. After all, I promised Zhou Xiaowen yesterday, so I can't keep my promise. Just as she parked the car, she was suddenly hit hard by the back, and her head hit the steering wheel, swelling up in a big lump. Unfastening the seat belt and getting off the car, I saw Su Baiwan coming out of the driver's cab in the rear. She smiled apologetically at Lin Mi and said, "I'm sorry, I just got my driver's license and didn't pay attention." Qin Yan got off the car from the other side and walked to Su Baiwan's side. Su Baiwan affectionately took his arm and complained, "It's all thanks to Ian. He must let me practice more. With such an expensive car, he's willing, and I feel sorry for him." Lin Mi said, "It's okay, let's follow the tail-end collision process. Do you want to go private or public?" Su Baiwan's face stiffened, and she quickly grabbed Qin Yan's hand, shook it, and coquettishly said, "Ian, I don't care. You caused me to pursue the tail end, and you have to take full responsibility." Qin Yan chuckled and said, "Okay, I take full responsibility." He looked up at Lin Mi, his smile fading and his expression cold. "It's okay, I'm insurance," he said. Lin Mi glanced at the tattered tail lights and bumper that had been hit, nodded, and said, "Okay." She took out her phone and took photos from various angles. Soon, someone came from the insurance department and filled out the loss assessment form on site. Throughout the entire process, Lin Mi and Qin Yan went back and forth at a similar pace. Although there was no extra word, Su Baiwan just felt it was eye-catching. She deliberately tiptoed on Qin Yan's face and kissed him, smiling with curved eyebrows and eyes. "Ah Yan, you're really amazing. The pure white tiger teeth are exposed, like a small moon, very infectious." Qin Yan furrowed his brows slightly, and let out a faint Su Baiwan immediately looked proudly at Lin Mi. However, Lin Mi didn't even glance at them, so she put away her credentials and turned around to leave. Su Baiwan's smile froze on her face. When Lin Mi entered, the gallery was cutting ribbon, and Zhou Xiaowen stood in the middle. Seeing her coming, he smiled from afar. Lin Mi nodded at him, arranged the flowers she brought, and silently spoke, "Congratulations." Zhou Xiaowen's smile became even more brilliant. Lin Mi felt a chill on her back, and when she turned around, she met the cold gaze of Qin Yan not far away. Neurosis. She withdrew her gaze expressionlessly. As Zhou Xiaowen's scissors fell and the cannon saluted, the gallery officially opened. After all, he is the second son of the Zhou family, and there are quite a few supporters. However, the gallery area is large and does not appear crowded. Most of the displayed works were painted by Zhou Xiaowen himself, and there is also a part of his collection. Lin Miaohua bought a spring residence painting for 23,000 yuan, which can be considered as supporting his career. Just as I finished paying, I heard a teasing voice, "If you like this painting, I'll give it to you. How can you afford it?" Chapter 6. Why is she worth my exception? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lin Mi looked up and Zhou Xiaowen didn't know when he came over. He pouted at the staff and said, "This is the second in charge of our gallery. We won't be allowed to collect money in the future, do you know?" The staff nodded hastily and said, "I understand." Zhou Xiaowen was satisfied and said, "Why don't you refund the money quickly?" Lin Mi smiled and pressed his hand down. "What's all this nonsense? Can't I afford expensive or cheap ones? Just take it for a little consideration." The staff stood there at a loss. Zhou Xiaowen saw her persistence, so he nodded and asked the staff to get busy before asking, "What's wrong with the bag on her forehead?" Lin Mi smiled and said, "I brake hard and accidentally hit it." Zhou Xiaowen gave her a thumbs up and said, "Wow, driving a car can make you look like this. Then he took out a small bottle and said, coincidentally, I have medicine here. Lin Mi chuckled and reached out to pick it up. Thank you, she said, but Zhou Shaoan had already dug up ointment and applied it to her forehead, scolding, don't move around. Lin Mi had no choice but to let him apply the medicine. After wiping it off, Zhou Shaoan handed her the medicine and said, this medicine is twice a day. How do you thank me? Lin Mi said, are you free tonight? How about treating you to dinner to celebrate the opening of your gallery? Zhou Shaoan was in a good mood and said, okay, let's go. I'll take you around. Lin Mi knew he was busy, so she smiled and waved her hand. Don't be fooled. Who wouldn't know that on Tuesday, when young master talked about art, he would talk endlessly. People like me who are full of passion won't listen. You go and greet others. Zhou Shaoan scolded with a smile, what are you? After a pause, he said again, you'll be waiting for me later. You also want to treat me to dinner. Lin Mi said helplessly, don't worry, I won't forget. After Zhou Shaoan left, Lin Mi's smile had not yet faded when a cold smile rang in her ear, so happy. Lin Mi froze. Qin Yan shook up in front of her, raised his hand and vigorously wiped her forehead a few times, until all the ointment had been wiped away. He then withdrew his hand with satisfaction, curling a strand of her hair with a frivolous expression encircling around her fingers. With a cool tone, if you climb up to the Zhou family, maybe I'm still afraid. Embroidered pillows like Zhou Shaoan, who have no real power, don't have the ability to protect you. Lin Mi pushed him away angrily, stay away from me. However, with excessive force, the old injury to the ankle that I twisted a few days ago recurred, causing a heart-wrenching pain. She turned pale in pain, with a cold sweat on her forehead, leaning against the wall. Qin Yan's gaze paused for a moment, and for some reason, he suddenly turned around and left with a cold face. Lin Mi lowered her head and saw a high swelling in her ankle, indicating that she had to go to the hospital this time. Just as I was about to leave, I heard Su Baiwan's voice, Secretary Lin. Lin Mi sighed and turned around obediently. Su Baiwan stood behind her and didn't know when she came over. She nodded and greeted, Miss Su. Su Baiwan's face was cold and her gaze was not kind. You are actually diligent. You chase men every minute and every second. You misunderstood, Lin Mi frowned, I'm not that bored. Misunderstanding. Have I wronged you? Su Baiwan sneered and approached, a shameless person like you can even take off your pants in the office. I'm really curious if you have any sense of shame. Have you never been with a man in your 8 lifetimes? That's why you're so ruthless. Lin Mi's expression sank, Miss Su, please pay attention to your words. A hint of coldness flashed in Su Baiwan's eyes, and she raised her hand and slapped Lin Mi hard in the face. I warn you, in front of me, it's best for you to restrain yourself. If I see you clinging to Ian again, don't blame me for ruining your reputation. You're just a little secretary, my Su family doesn't take it seriously yet. If you don't want to die, just stay away from Ian. Lin Mi's face turned red and swollen, and her expression completely cooled down. Miss Su, I am polite to you because I actually caused harm to you, but this is not a reason for you to insult me recklessly. If possible, I wish I could stay away from him. Su Baiwan suddenly blushed and choked up, so you forced me to work with you. Secretary Lin, you're going too far. Lin Mi didn't react for a moment until she saw Qin Yan approaching with a dark face. He hid the things in his hand, and with a cold face, he protected Su Baiwan in his arms. He raised his eyes and said coldly, Lin Mi, did I give you a face? Wan, do you dare to move? Lin Mi finally realized that she had been tricked by Su Baiwan. She tugged at the corners of her mouth without explaining, and couldn't be perfunctory anymore. I'm sorry, she said. Qin Yan stared at her tightly, his anger seeming even stronger in his eyes. His thin lips pursed tightly, and after a few seconds, he said, let me see you bullying Wan again in the future. Don't blame me for being impolite to you. After speaking, she hugged Su Baiwan and left without looking back. On the car, Su Baiwan sat in the passenger seat, glanced at the ointment and safflower oil thrown beside her, and said, "Ian, do you really like her?" Qin Yen drove the car without looking askance and speaking. Su Baiwan bit her lips and her heart sank. "Didn't you say you're not interested in women? Are you planning to make an exception for her?" Qin Yen sneered and sneered, "Why is she worth making an exception for me?" Su Baiwan finally breathed a sigh of relief. Qin Yen looked at her with a slightly cold expression and said, "The people around me, it's not your turn to move. This hasn't happened again today, do you understand?" Su Baiwan said, "I understand." In the gallery, Lin Mi tried several times but couldn't use her ankles. "I have no choice but to call Zhou Shaoan and see if he can find a staff member to take her to the hospital." Unexpectedly, Zhou Shaoan personally came over and without saying a word, he picked her up horizontally. Lin Mi quickly stopped, "I can leave." Zhou Shaoan looked indifferent and said, "All right, let's not have so much to do between friends. If you have to walk on your own, it will be ruined tomorrow. Do you believe it?" Lin Mi said, "Then you just need to find someone here at the gallery." Before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Zhou Shaoan, "Business is not good, and I'm running out of people. Do you insist on stabbing me in the heart? I'm also idle." Lin Mi had no choice but to give up. "I went to the hospital for a check-up, but fortunately, I didn't hurt any bones. The doctor gave me a massage and prescribed medicine oil, instructing me, although it's not serious, you shouldn't take it lightly. It's best not to go down to the ground before reducing the swelling." After coming out of the hospital, Zhou Shaoan joked, "You've really become a porcelain doll now. Can I be your knight these days and see you off on the way to work?" Lin Mi waved her hand and said, "No need, taking a taxi is very convenient." Zhou Shaoan didn't say anything more. "You've done a good job these past 2 years, you've moved to live here," Zhou Shaoan joked as she couldn't finish her meal 3 years ago, when he chased her, she still lived in a shabby place. Lin Mi smiled without explaining. She politely declined Zhou Shaoan's escort and jumped into the elevator with one leg. Opening the door, "I didn't expect Qin Yen to be sitting on the sofa again." She didn't hide her disgust and said, "Why are you here again?" Chapter 7. It's really the first time she's seen someone so cheap. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Qin Yen lifted his eyelids and glanced at her treated ankle. He said calmly, "I didn't send you back on Tuesday. The method is good, we've already found a flower protector." "You don't have to worry," Lin Mi said as she changed her slippers, "so protecting him, you want to wait until I'm tired of seamless connection." Qin Yen sat there, holding a cigarette in his hand and casually spinning between his fingers. "I wish I could stay away from me. I'm at least a master now, and I still make you look down on me so much." Lin Mi paused and understood that Qin Yen had overheard her conversation with Su Baiwan. "I dare not," she said indifferently, "I really overestimated you. I thought you would feel guilty." Qin Yen stood up and approached her. "Don't you want to explain a few words?" The tall figure of the man created a strong sense of oppression, and Lin Mi walked around him without changing her expression, opening the takeout box. "No, those are all true words," she said. Qin Yan's face was gloomy, and he forcefully snatched the fried meat from her hand. Lin Mi glared at him. Qin Yan smiled coldly and mercilessly, "You have the ability to mess with me." Lin Mi had a good mentality and instead lowered her head to drink soup, pretending that there was no one in front of her. The pan fry in Qin Yan's mouth suddenly became less fragrant. He leaned down in front of Lin Mi and sneered, "If you really want to leave, there's nothing you can do. It doesn't matter whether your mother is good or not. To be honest, without her, I really wouldn't be able to hold on to you." Noticing the uncontrollable anger in Lin Mi's eyes, he regained his joy and said, if you can't bear to part with your mother, then stop dreaming. There are only a few who have the ability to oppose me, and they still have to weigh whether it's worth it for you. You might as well use your brain to think about how to make my interest in you last longer. Lin Mi suddenly looked up at him and said, Mr. Qin plans to eat with me in the future. Qin Yan glanced at her and said, what's going on? Lin Mi's tone remained calm as she said, pay for the meal expenses. The deal I reached with you did not include the item of managing the meal. Qin Yan looked at her with ill intentions and said, isn't it true that both the upper and lower levels are responsible for food? Why, if you manage the lower level, you don't want to manage the upper level? Lin Mi. Qin Yan smiled happily and said, pack up and have a trip with me tomorrow. I injured my foot, Lin Mi said expressionlessly. Qin Yan was eating her fried dough while watching her smile, that's your business. I've always had a clear distinction between public and private, so don't expect me to be selfish just by getting into bed. Lin Mi thought she had met many top-notch people before, but it was really the first time she had met someone as cheap as this. Previously, he was a sunny and kind-hearted young man, but why did he become so morally upright? After Qin Yan left, Lin Mi limped into the kitchen and cooked a bowl of noodles for herself. He ate all the takeout, but she wasn't full. The next day, Lin Mi called an errand runner to help her carry the box down. Before the booked car arrived, she waited downstairs. A car honked its horn at her from behind, and Lin Mi turned around to see Zhou Shaoan grinning at her. He lowered the car window and said, let's go. I'll take you to the office on the way. Lin Mi said awkwardly, I'm on a business trip today. I'll schedule a car to take me to the airport later. Could you please make a trip for free? Zhou Shaoan frowned and said, are your leaders having a headache? Are you still on a business trip with your feet injured like this? Lin Mi thought to herself that it's not just about having a brain full of flaws, it's not just about having flaws and pitfalls. Before he could speak, he heard a slightly cold voice behind him, it seems that it's not Zhou's turn to intervene in our Huayu's work arrangements, right? Qin Yan went downstairs at some point, looking at Zhou Shaoan with sharp eyes. Perhaps due to a business trip, he didn't wear a suit today, but instead wore a light gray casual suit, which reduced his sharp aura and made Lin Mi vaguely see the young man he used to look like when he grew up. Zhou Shaoan got off the car and protected Lin Mi behind him, speaking solemnly in a rare tone. Mr. Qin, I didn't mean to offend you, but Lin Mi doesn't have to fight hard at work. The doctor said yesterday that she can't touch the ground with her feet for a month. She really can't handle business trips. Qin Yan looked at the woman who was being guarded behind like a chick, and his black eyes turned cold. Tuesday Shaoan knows my secretary very well, he said. Zhou Shaoan said, she is my friend, so I naturally understand. Qin Yan sneered and just then, the driver drove over. He looked at Lin Mi calmly and said, why you doesn't care for idle people? If Secretary Lin really can't adapt to this kind of work intensity, then forget it. Lin Mi walked out from behind Zhou Shaoan and said, my feet are fine. Zhou Shaoan wanted to stop him, but Lin Mi shook her head at him and said, this is my job, don't worry, I have a plan. The driver opened the car door for Qin Yan, and Qin Yan sat directly in. He sat behind, and Lin Mi naturally went to pull the passenger door. As a result, the passenger sat at Su Chu. Unable to do anything, Lin Mi had to grit her teeth and sit in the back seat. Qin Yan glanced at her and said, the hero saved the beauty. What a great opportunity. Maybe you can still fly up to the branch and marry into the Zhou family. Don't you think it's a pity to just leave people like this? Lin Mi was pragmatic and said, I can't enter the Zhou family's door. The Zhou family values family status and cannot accept me. Qin Yan's face was ugly. Have you really considered it? After a pause, he sneered lightly, you have self-awareness. Lin Mi didn't know why his face became gloomy. This person was really inexplicable, and it was clear that he had offended him first. Su Chu trembled and pinched the document, afraid to speak for a long time. Since Secretary Lin walked out of General Qin's office in disheveled clothes that day, there have been rumors in the company that Lin Mi would do anything to rise to power, and everyone would speak up for Miss Su. She is a malicious mistress with corrupt morals, a dog-like demeanor, and a bad character. She would curse as harshly as possible. But now it seems that Secretary Lin, when facing Mr. Qin, not only did not bow and flatter, but also he looked too lazy to pay attention. Is this just Secretary Lin's method? But how could she hear a strong sour taste from Mr. Qin's mouth? Su Chu waited for another long time, but when he saw that there was no further movement from the two people behind him, he nervously handed over the documents and said, "Mr. Qin, this is Hongxing's information." Qin Yan lifted his chin and said, "Give it to her." Su handed it to Lin Mi. Lin Mi took it over and said, "Thank you." Su Chu glanced at Qin Yan and saw that he had not given any instructions. He then boldly spoke up, "Let's go to Suzhou in the afternoon and have a dinner with Hongxing in the evening. The main purpose is to reach a cooperation agreement on a piece of land. Please take a look and get to know more." Lin Mi said, "Okay." In fact, she didn't even need to look at it. As soon as she heard the name Hongxing, she knew it in her heart. Hongxing is one of the few top-tier physical enterprises in China, and recently received a piece of land for offsetting debts. That piece of land has a suitable area and location, and as long as we cooperate, it is a big deal that we can make a steady profit without losing. Many people in the industry are watching. The reason why Lin Mi understands so clearly is because this is the last project she was responsible for at seidHe. In fact, she has reached a preliminary consensus with Hongxing, and if it weren't for that terrible thing, this project would already be in seidHe's pocket. She opened the information and looked at it. Sure enough, Huayu's goal, like seidHe's, is also to strive for joint development of that land. Chapter 8. This is Chief Lin. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It seems that Qin Yan has already thoroughly investigated her, so he named her to follow. Look, this man is so shrewd. But she was also grateful that she had the value of being used and plotted by him. Lin Mi closed the file and didn't look at it again. Qin Yan casually looked over and said, "How much certainty do you have?" To be honest, Lin Mi said, "Recently, Hongxing split its equity and handed over a lot of speaking power. It was only when seidHe agreed to share some of the benefits that they were able to negotiate. If Huayu's bottom line is the same as seidHe's, then it is very likely to be secure. She was the one who connected all the key links with Hongxing, and the other party recognized her. As long as Huayu's conditions were not harsh, there would be no major issues." Qin Yan chuckled and looked down, "I'm not as cowardly as seidHe. I want 60% profit and the right to speak for the entire project." "It's impossible." Lin Mi shook her head without even thinking. seidHe relinquished half of her voice and only obtained 40% of the benefits before reluctantly allowing Hongxing to cooperate internally. Qin Yan's condition may be that he will be kicked out by others after finishing speaking. She thought he was not familiar with the complex internal affairs of Hongxing and explained, "Hongxing's situation is very special now, and various forces are competing." Before he could finish speaking, Qin Yan interrupted, "I don't care about that, I just want the result." "I can't achieve this result," Lin Mi said after holding her breath in her throat for a while. Qin Yan looked at her with a sidelong glance and mocked, "It seems that even the Grand Lin chief is just like that." "Yes, my skills are not up to par," Lin Mi admitted bluntly. "Let's wait and see if Mr. Qin can show his skills." Su Chu became more and more alarmed as he listened. "seidHe, Chief Lin. Isn't it what she thinks? We will arrive at the airport soon." Qin Yan got off the car first, and Su Chu slowed down to wait for Lin Mi. He took the initiative to pick up her box. "Sorry for the trouble," Lin Mi quickly thanked. Su Chu waved his hand and said, "Harm, are your feet inconvenient?" After a pause, he asked cautiously, "Secretary Lin, I just heard from you. Shouldn't that be the famous Chief Lin of the Xie family? Is that you? Lin Mi smiled and said, it's just an empty name. Su Chu was shocked and said, really? You're a legend in the executive world. How could you stoop to the position of a junior secretary in Huayu? She was brought by Qin Yan from Beijing and has only been in Yincheng for 3 years. In addition, Huayu and Xie have not had much cooperation, so she has not seen Lin Mi before. But this does not prevent her from hearing the 3 words of Chief Lin like thunder. In Yincheng, Lin Mi's name may not be as loud, but when it comes to CEO Lin, it is definitely second to none. Many of the projects she has worked on have been spread as classic cases in major companies to this day. Su Chu felt that his worldview was about to be reshaped. The famous Chief Lin actually works under her command. How could she be so talented? And it's still being rumored so badly in the company. This is Chief Lin. Lin Mi smiled and shook her head. Su Chu has lifted me up. Huayu has a stronger development momentum than Xie, and I am also a good bird choosing trees to live in. Su Xiang didn't believe this. Even if Xie's CEO Lin changes jobs, it is impossible for him to be demoted 3 levels in a row. She remembered the day when Lin Mi came out of the CEO's office, and how Mr. Qin occasionally teased Lin Mi, but she always seemed indifferent. I feel like I've caught the truth. It must be General Qin's love and reluctance, using special means to force Chief Lin to bow his head in a humble manner. Poor Chief Lin. Lin Mi looked at Su Chu's expression and felt as if he had misunderstood something. But as she arrived at the waiting room, she didn't say much. Before boarding the plane, Su Baiwan arrived and called out from a distance, Ian. She wore a literary beige dress, white sneakers, and ran over like a bird, jumping into Qin Yan's arms. Fortunately, I caught up. Ian, I have to go too. I won't see you for a few days, I'll miss you. Qin Yan was embraced by her, his eyes dim and unclear. It took a few seconds before he let out a Su Baiwan became happy and coquettishly stuffed the backpack into his hand. It's so heavy, can you help me carry it? Qin Yan didn't refuse, let's board the plane. Such a loving scene. Su Chu used to be addicted to drugs. Now she just thinks that Mr. Qin is so scumbag, he has blinded that face. Sure enough, wealthy people don't have a good thing. They are not afraid to hold on to it while eating from the bowl and watching from the pot. Before boarding, Su Baiwan turned around and handed the ticket to Lin Mi with a smile. Secretary Lin, I joined at the last minute and couldn't find a suitable seat. Would you mind changing seats with me? Lin Mi looked calm and gave her plane ticket. A hint of pride flashed in Su Baiwan's eyes and she turned around to go up. Su Xiang leaned over to take a look and exclaimed in surprise, Chief Lin, this is an economy class ticket. The secretary of the CEO's office is reimbursed for business trips according to first-class standards. Miss Su, isn't this intentional bullying? It's okay, Lin Mi said indifferently. She is too lazy to waste time and energy arguing about these trivial matters as long as they don't interfere with the main matter. Su Xiang silently gave her a thumbs up in her heart. What is the demeanor of a great general, what is the demeanor of a king, Chief Lin, truly you. Lin Mi remembered another thing, by the way, don't call me Chief Lin in the future. There has been a change in my position and it's not suitable. Su Xiang quickly nodded and said, okay, I understand. He has become Lin Mi's younger brother. The economy class was chaotic and crowded, and Su Xiang was worried that Lin Mi's feet would be inconvenient. She specially arranged for her and asked the flight attendant for a blanket before leaving. In just 2 hours, it landed in Suzhou. After leaving the airport, there was already a car waiting to take them to the hotel for rest. The check.In has been arranged in advance, and the front desk looked apologetically at Su Baiwan, sorry, we don't have any available rooms at the moment. Qin Yan's footsteps didn't stop and he went straight into the elevator. Su Baiwan bit her lip and gave Lin Mi a meaningful glance. This doesn't make me have nowhere to live, does it? Su Xiang said straightforwardly, there's a Sheraton house across the street. Miss Su, why don't you go and ask? It's always inconvenient to live separately, Su Baiwan said with a hint of unease on her face. Seeing that Lin Mi and Su Xiang had stopped speaking, she felt a bit displeased and spoke directly, Secretary Lin, why don't you squeeze in with Su? Lin Mi frowned and said, Miss Su, we all have official business to attend to, so sharing a room can be inconvenient. Even if I am willing, Secretary Su may not be able to adapt. If you don't want to change hotels, you can share a room with Mr. Qin. A hint of resentment flashed in Su Baiwan's eyes. Same room as Qin Yan. She really wants it. Is it possible to enter? Is this slut surnamed Lin intentionally humiliating her? Su Xiang pulled Lin Mi and said, Miss Su, let me share the room with Secretary Lin. She had checked the room numbers before, and both Secretary Lin and Mr. Qin's rooms were on the 16th floor, and they were adjacent. However, her room was on the 11th floor, which actually helped Secretary Lin stay away from Mr. Qin. Anyway, it's a suite, one person per room, and it's not troublesome. Su Xiang's gaze is firm. Protect our Chief Lin. Su Baiwan proudly went upstairs. Lin Mi and Su Xiang returned to their room and reorganized the grand project together. The more they discussed, the more Su Xiang admired Lin Mi. This unique insight, this cunning perspective, to say a word of praise for General Qin, she has only seen it in General Qin. Lunch is called to the room for dinner. At 4 p.m., the two of them tidied up neatly and went downstairs to meet Qin Yan. Why does she feel the smell of licking dogs in Chapter 9? You are listening at novelfull.audio. When he went down, Qin Yan was sitting in the resting area of the hall drinking tea. Su Baiwan didn't know where she had gone, but she wasn't there. Su Xiang's heart suddenly became clear. Upon hearing the commotion, Qin Yan lifted his eyelids and looked over, his gaze fixed on Lin Mi. It was unclear, did you change rooms with Wan Wan? Lin Mi nodded and said, there are no available rooms in the hotel. Qin Yan slowly put down his teacup and spoke in a faint tone, change it back. Lin Mi couldn't figure out what trick they were playing and asked, and Miss Su? That's not something you should worry about. Qin Yan crossed her legs and leaned back, glancing at the nude high heels she was wearing. Are your ankles okay? Lin Mi said, all right. Actually, it's not good, but in the workplace, a business negotiation is about to take place, and the most basic professional ethics need to be presented. Qin Yan sneered and threw the paper bag beside her, replace it. Inside is a brand new pair of flat shoes, the shoe size is just right. Lin Mi pinched the bag and said, improper attire will affect the company's external image. There's so much nonsense, Qin Yan interrupted her with a frivolous smile. Why, do you want me to exchange it for you with my own hands? No need. Lin Mi was blocked in one breath and stopped insisting. She walked aside and sat down to change her shoes. She hasn't worn flat shoes for many years. Her net height is 1.68 meters, which is not short compared to girls, but she still has no advantage in front of men. When she first came to Yunqing to work hard, she suffered a lot of losses. Later on, she learned to be smart and arranged her high heels for professional wear, paired with neat hair ties and a serious expression. She firmly grasped the momentum aspect. Lin Mi changed her shoes, Qin Yan stood up, let's go. Lin Mi, who was wearing flat shoes, was much shorter than Qin Yan. She felt a bit uncomfortable and moved back. Qin Yan glanced back at her with a hint of warning in his tone, am I a jackal, a wolf, a tiger, or a leopard? Not really. Lin Mi had no choice but to silently take 2 steps to follow him. Su Xiang witnessed the whole process and his eyes twitched. Although Mr. Qin has been a cold and aloof group from beginning to end, why does she feel a dog-licking smell? The appointment with Hongsheng was at 5 o'clock, and they waited in the hotel private room for a while. The talent from Hongsheng arrived late. Mr. Qin, long wait. The person who came was the Grand Second in Command Lu Yun, in his 40s, with a thin and shrewd appearance. He holds a 23% stake in Hongsheng and has a strong voice. Lin Mi was the one who first talked about this project through his connections. After Lu Yun finished greeting Qin Yan, he turned his head and saw Lin Mi. He was surprised and reached out his hand. "Oh. Chief Lin is also here." Lin Mi shook hands and said with a smile, "I just changed employers. I hope Mr. Lu can help me more." Lu Yun laughed and said, "I dare not. Chief Lin is so powerful, I have to beg for your mercy." When reminiscing about the past, it's always good. When Lu Yun sat down to discuss cooperation, he restrained his smile and spoke very impolitely. "Mr. Lin and I are also old friends. In theory, I should have sold this face, but Mr. Qin's conditions are too harsh. To be honest, there are many companies that are willing to cooperate with Hongsheng now. Some are willing to only get 30% of the profit, but Mr. Qin wants to get 60%. Isn't that too bold?" Qin Yan leaned back on the chair, leisurely playing with his wine glass. He didn't answer Lu Yun's words directly, only gave Lin Mi a nod with his eyes. "Does Secretary Lin have any ideas?" Lin Mi secretly cursed this dog for not being good at martial arts. She had already told him her thoughts a long time ago. Getting 60% profit is simply a dream. But she was not unprepared either. At present, Hongsheng and most of its partners have the expectation of building a shopping mall on this land, but the disadvantage of shopping malls is that the payment cycle is slow, and although it is stable, the profit margin is low. But if we build a hospital, it will be different. Even if I don't say it, Mr. Lu can still think of it, right? Huayu can bring greater returns to Hongsheng than other companies. This is something she repeatedly pondered and inferred on the plane, and its feasibility is very high. The profits of hospitals far exceed those of shopping malls, but not everyone has the qualifications for development. She has checked and found that Huayu has the qualifications in this area. Although Lu Yun was impressed, he didn't nod. CEO Lin should know that no one in Hongsheng can the final say. Even if I want to talk about this, the company may not be able to pass. If there is not enough temptation, I'm afraid it is not optimistic. Lin Mi had long known that this would be the result. She glanced at Qin Yan. "Don't you want to be a coward? It's just talking." Qin Yan looked over with a smirk, as if he had seen through her thoughts at first glance, his eyes tinged with a hint of mockery. He lightly tapped his index finger on the table and said, "What if we establish a one-stop industry cluster for pregnancy and childbirth? Is the temptation strong enough?" Lin Mi paused. Pregnancy and childbirth belong to the lucrative industry, and that piece of land is enough to establish an entire industrial cluster. If Huayu can really build it, it is not an exaggeration to make 60% of the profit. But the only problem is Lu Yun had already asked, as far as I know, Huayu doesn't seem to have the development qualifications in this area, right? The qualifications in the maternity industry are far more demanding than those in shopping malls or hospitals. Qin Yan smiled arrogantly. "Huayu doesn't have it, but the Qin family does." Lin Mi fell silent. "You can do it, you are noble, and your back against a big tree is remarkable." Although Lu Yun was not clear about Qin Yan's background, this matter was immediately apparent. Excitedly, he picked up his glass and said, "If that's the case, then we'll rely on General Qin in the future." After finishing a glass of wine, he paid tribute to Lin Mi and said, "I still need to thank Chief Lin for his recommendation. This matter is about to be completed, and I owe you a favor." Lin Mi smiled and said, "It's just a matter of personal responsibility." Mr. Lu said it's important. Su Xiang, as the head of the Grand Executive Office, has become a little girl pouring wine, but she is not at all unwilling. "Oh, what should I do if I have more respect for the CEO of Bailin? The next meal was a feast of joy for both guests and hosts. After finishing his meal, Lu Yun wanted to arrange the second half. Qin Yan calmly glanced at Lin Mi and shook his head to politely refuse. Let's forget about today. There are plenty of opportunities in the future. Lu Yun had no choice but to give up. Seeing Lu Yun off, Lin Mi leaned against the door and forced herself to relax, but there was still a piercing pain coming from her ankle. She remained silent with a pale face, wanting to wait for the pain to ease. Just now when Lu Yun was toasting, she accidentally touched her and instinctively supported the table. Unexpectedly, she still injured her ankle. Qin Yan walked over, her tall figure enveloping her, and asked in a deep voice, "What's going on?" Lin Mi shook her head and said, "It's okay, just take a break and it'll be fine." Qin Yan sneered and bent down to pick her up, instructing Su Xiang, "Call a car and go to the hospital." Chapter 10, Didn't I Ask You to Move Back? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Su Xiang hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Oh, good." Lin Mi struggled, "Let me down, I'll go by myself." Qin Yan's mouth curved slightly, his hand deliberately loosened, and he said calmly, "Don't move around. I'm not responsible for falling and breaking my leg." Lin Mi really didn't dare to move anymore. Upon arriving at the hospital, the doctor examined and said, "It's fortunate that the bones were not involved, but this is not the first time your foot has been injured. You need to be careful. If you don't pay attention to the injury again, you may end up with permanent damage." Lin Mi agreed, "Okay, I understand." But she understood in her heart that there was no other way to recover from this injury besides rest. How could she qualify for rest now? The doctor pressed again, and the pain in the cone eased. After taking the medicine and coming out of the hospital, Qin Yan said, "Sign the contract with Hongxing tomorrow, you don't need to participate." Lin Mi nodded and said, "I understand." Qin Yan glanced at her sideways and said, "What do you know?" Lin Mi said, "Signing a contract will involve some company secrets." Qin Yanxin, however, is normal for her. After all, if she could grasp his handle, she would definitely take action without hesitation. Qin Yan chuckled and said, "You have always liked to use the greatest malice to speculate about others. Why can't I just feel sorry for your feet?" Lin Mi dare not agree, she is not foolish. Qin Yan sneered and raised his hand to call a taxi before leaving. Lin Mi and Su Xiang returned to the hotel. As soon as they entered the suite, Lin Mi's phone rang. She glanced at the number and answered, "What's up?" The voice on the phone was cold and concise, "Come up." After speaking, "I just hung up." Lin Mi frowned and said to Su Xiang, "For a while, I'll go out." Su Xiang said earnestly, "Your feet are not convenient, let me accompany you." Lin Mi, "No need, I'll be back soon." Su Xiang vaguely realized something and dared not persist. Lin Mi arrived at the 16th floor where Qin Yan was located. As soon as she got out of the elevator, she saw Qin Yan and Su Baiwan kissing in the corridor. Judging from that posture, it should be Su Baiwan taking the initiative and Qin Yan being forced. Lin Mi was very conscious and prepared to avoid it. As soon as she turned around, she heard Qin Yan's faint voice behind her, "Come here." Lin Mi turned around and saw that the two had already separated. Su Baiwan bit her lips, looking very unhappy. She walked over politely and said, "Mr. Qin, what's up?" Qin Yan's face was a bit cold and solemn, and his tone was not very good. "Didn't I ask you to move back?" Lin Mi paused and said, "I think. It's nice to live with Secretary Su." "You better not think so," Qin Yan interrupted her without hesitation. Su Baiwan tugged at his clothes with grievances and said, I don't want to." Qin Yan glanced at her, somewhat perfunctory, and said, "The room over there is big, well behaved." Su Baiwan stomped her feet, went back to the house to get her bag, and reluctantly left. Before leaving, she even gave Lin Mi a glare. Lin Mi silently turned around and was about to leave when Qin Yan asked, "Where are you going?" "Take your luggage." Qin Yan threw down a sentence and said, "I just called Su Xiang. She will bring it to you later." Then he entered his own room. Lin Mi slammed at the closed door and silently cursed, "Damn it." The door suddenly opened, and before Lin Mi could close her mouth, she collided head-on with Qin Yan. The man leaned against the door frame and looked at him with a smile on his face. "Secretary Lin seems to have a problem with me." "How could that be?" Lin Mi turned around expressionlessly. "It's nothing, I'll go back to the room first." Qin Yan smiled at the corner of his mouth and looked at her back playfully, until with a loud bang, the door of the next room was forcefully closed, and he finally withdrew his gaze and sneered. Dog temperament. When Su Xiang was delivering luggage to Lin Mi, she also brought a beef belly bag. Tonight at the dinner party, Lin Mi only touched this, and she estimated that Lin Mi should like to eat it. As soon as she entered the door, Su Xiang smelled a fresh fragrance, and tears of displeasure almost flowed from the corner of her mouth. "Secretary Lin, did you cook your own food?" Su Xiang stared straight at the bowl of fried rice noodles on the table, and the mere smell of it made her feel dizzy. Lin Mi closed the door and walked over with a smile. I didn't have enough dinner, so I called the front desk to order ingredients. Do you want to try them? There's still something in the pot. I want it." Su Xiang quickly nodded and put down the beef belly bun. "I won't eat it for free, I'll add it to your meal." I took the bowl with a jolt. Stir-fried rice noodles are filled with eggs and shredded vegetables, which are fresh and fragrant. After taking a bite, it is filled with a satisfying feeling of carbon water. "It's so delicious, isn't it?" Su Xiang sighed while eating. "You're good-looking, have strong business skills, and cook so well. If I were a man, I would definitely marry you back home." Lin Mi smiled and was about to speak when the door was suddenly knocked on. Lin Mi stood up and went to open the door. "I even ordered cherries from the fresh food supermarket, but later." At the moment she opened the door, her voice came to a sudden halt. Qin Yan held her cherry in his hand and looked at her with a smile on his face. "What will happen later?" "Feed me." Lin Mi. Su Xiang. Qin Yan swaggered inside and said, "Okay, I promise you, go wash up." As soon as he entered the room and saw Su Xiang, he greeted him calmly without any conscious intrusion. Su Xiang appears submissive on the surface, but in her heart, she is crazily brainstorming. Let Chief Lin clean up. What to clean up? Khaleesi or Lin Mi remained calm and returned to continue eating, completely ignoring the man on the sofa. Su Xiang smiled dryly and said, "Did Mr. Qin eat it?" Qin Yan's legs were crossed, elegant and luxurious. "I've tried it before, you guys can eat it," he said. Su Xiang just sat down and took a few bites, feeling like a thorn in her back. As she looked up, Qin Yan nodded and smiled at her. "Take your time eating, don't be in a hurry." Su Xiang stood up silently. "Well, Secretary Lin, I suddenly remembered that there's still some work to be done." "Take your time and eat, I'll go back first." Nodding to Qin Yan again, "Mr. Qin, goodbye." Qin Yan asked gently, "Are you eating well?" "Eat. Eat well." Su Xiang stood up with sweat and ran away in the wilderness. Leaving holding the bowl was her last stubbornness. Seeing off Su Xiang, Lin Mi expressionlessly stuffed the last few bites into her mouth. Qin Yan got up and walked over at some point, lazily pulling open the chair next to her and sitting down. Seeing that Lin Mi didn't respond at all, he reached out his index finger and lightly tapped the table, casually saying, "I'm hungry, go cook me a bowl of noodles, seafood noodles." Lin Mi rudely dismantled the platform and said, "Didn't Mr. Qin eat it?" Qin Yanli was not straightforward but also strong. "I haven't had enough to eat." Lin Mi didn't give any face. "There's no ingredients, Mr. Qin can order takeout." Qin Yan took out his phone and made a phone call. Half an hour later, Lin Mi's eyebrows twitched as she watched boxes of seafood piled up like small mountains. Qin Yan smiled at her and said, "We have the ingredients now, go cook the noodles." Lin Mi sneered, "Wasting so much food just to eat noodles, you're not afraid to hold on to it." Qin Yan felt happy at the moment and didn't argue with her. "I also want the kind of razor clams I ate that day." "Put more razor clams on," he said. Lin Mi was chopping the kitchen knife with a thud, as if about to slaughter someone. Qin Yan raised the corner of his mouth and stood outside the door teasing, "Be gentle. If someone thinks we're doing something, it's not good to come over." Lin Mi's movements froze as she heard him chuckle lightly and say, "I know you're in a hurry, be good, and I'll satisfy you when I'm full." The kitchen knife tilted and immediately went off target.